Second speaker is Mr. Mehrdad Rahimi Mogaddam from University of New South Wales, Sydney, who will tell us about, give a presentation entitled Down with Persianization, Language Policy and Persian Literary Canon in Iranian Azerbaijan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boinska. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as you can see, the title is Down on Persianization, Language Policy and the Persian Literary Canon in Iranian Azerbaijan. I'm gonna introduce by a brief introduction to the intellectual circle known as Berlin Circle. Several scholars have argued that the members of the Berlin Circle played a key role in laying the foundations of modern Iranian nationalism. In 1915, when Hassan Tagizadeh, as the leader of this intellectual cohort, arrived in Berlin, the world was already at war. In an attempt to fight against the Russian and British domination in Iran, he had decided to work with the Germans. Therefore, immediately after his arrival in Berlin, he appealed to Iranians all over Europe to join him in the Iranian National Committee. The Germans funded the circle's operations and even provided the members with living stipends. The circle was involved in various propaganda and political activities, most of which targeted the Russians and the British. However, apart from that, they were also engaged in numerous intellectual discussions, and the main medium for those discussions was Kaveh, a semi-monthly Persian language magazine. Several scholars consider the publication of Kaveh a landmark in modern Iranian intellectual history, to the extent that it has been argued that, in an important sense, the history of Iranian nationalism began with the publication of Kaveh. It was in the pages of Kaveh and later on Iran Shah, another periodical published by the members of the Berlin Circle, that these intellectuals discussed various historical, political, and cultural issues pertaining to Iran's future. Highlighting the intellectual significance of these discussions, Marashi notes that it was during this period that the process of reform and modernization underwent a crucial shift away from the late imperial project of the Qajar state and toward a nationalist project that would dominate Iranian politics for much of the 20th century. Precisely because of this, I believe it is important to investigate carefully and critically the writings of the members of this circle to see what were their views on Iran's language and literature. When we survey the pages of Kaveh and Iran Shah, we come across a number of articles and pieces related to Iran's language and literature. Perhaps for the first time drawn on the Orientalist scholarship, Kaveh published a series of articles titled Prominent Points of Poets of Iran, Mashahir Shu'ara Iran, and in it suggested that we have to study Persian literature in a scholarly way, like the way Europeans do. And it is in these articles and in these pieces that we can see the early traces of the linking of Iranian identity to Persian language and Persian literature. Furthermore, as you can see in Iran Shah, the second piece, What is Literature? Adabiyat Cheez. This is from 1922, as you can see. Even the concept of literature itself was being investigated and explored. And this is a testament to the fact that still in the third decade of the 20th century, the concept of literature was not a fixed concept among Iranian intellectuals. And precisely because of that, these intellectuals wanted to discuss the concept of literature as dominant in Europe. And it is exactly, again, in these writings that the concept of national literature begins to show itself, begins to emerge. And this Herderian idea of national literature is present in the background in almost all of these literary writings. Furthermore, within Iran itself, important intellectual and political figures were writing on the importance of Persian literature and Persian language. And apart from that, we're also highlighting the role of Persian literature in homogenizing the whole country from a linguistic perspective. For instance, Muhammad Ali Furughi, whose importance in modern Iranian history is pretty well known to almost all scholars of Iranian studies. In a confidential letter addressed to Iranian politicians, after discussing the concept of minority and its importance in the world politics in a post-Versailles world, talks about Iran's minorities, Azerbaijanis, Kurds, Arabs, and writes that we should be wary of these groups. And then goes on to write that, as it happens, neither Turkish nor Kurdish are literary languages, and our minorities do not benefit from a literary or an intellectual heritage. Therefore, they will be assimilated into the Persian language and literature effortlessly. But at the same time, Persian literature and language should be developed and empowered too. So this idea of assimilation and the idea that we should erase the traces of non-Persian languages is very apparent and clear in the writings of Iranian intellectuals and Iranian nationalists at the time. In the pages of Ayende, another important magazine published in Tehran by Mahmoud Afshar, himself a previous member of the Berlin Circle, again, there are numerous literary writings, literary biographies dedicated to Persian poets. And as Arya Fani has pointed out, that various writers of the Ayende were using different sources to craft biographies of Persian literary figures. Apart from that emphasis on Persian language and Persian literature, Mahmoud Afshar quite very bluntly calls for the eradication of Iran's non-Persian languages and writes that in order to achieve national unity, we have to suppress and eradicate non-Persian languages. We have to help so that everyone all across the country will speak and write in the Persian. And in a way, very clearly suggests that we have to impose Persian language all over the country. These intellectual discussions played a key role in shaping the nationalist policies of the Pahlavi state. And following the establishment of the Pahlavi state, prominent literary scholars were commissioned with writing the literary history of Iran. And to do so, they use classical Persian literature so that they can create a national literary canon. They aimed at rewriting Iran's literary history in a way that was in line with the pillars of Iranian nationalism. And this led to the erasure of Iran's non-Persian literatures from the official literary history, from literary anthologies, and from literary textbooks. Furthermore, to give a concrete shape to this literary canon, tombs and monuments were built all across the country for prominent Persian poets. Most important of which, as you can see, was Ferdowsi monument, inaugurated by the king himself. With the activities of figures such as Furughi, Persian Language Academy was founded. And apart from that, literary congresses dedicated to prominent Persian poets again were held, most important of which was Ferdowsi Millennial, in which important and prestigious Orientalists from all over the world took part. Furthermore, the state started publishing cheap and affordable literary books in an attempt to make Persian literature more accessible to a wider audience. Addressing the political functions of literary canon, Terry Eagleton writes, literary canon, the unquestioned great tradition of the national literature, has to be recognized as a construct fashioned by particular people for particular reasons at a certain time. Now, looking back at the Pahlavi period, I believe we can discern three different distinct functions performed by this Persian literary canon. The first one, I believe, is providing legitimacy for the monarchy, like in the extremely anachronistic readings of those literary figures, those literary scholars who were working with the Pahlavi state. All those literary works, such as, let's say, Iran's national epic, Shahnameh, were interpreted as an emblem of the continuation and legitimacy of the institution of the monarchy throughout the Iranian history. Later on, numerous books were published, such as King and People According to Shahnameh, King and Army According to Shahnameh. So you can see that this link was very clear in interpreting the current situation by drawing on the previous three works. The second one was, I believe, is marginalizing religion and the role of clerics. Since the state was basically secular and needed an ideological source to create this sense of Iranianness, and at the same time didn't want to embolden and empower its religious opponents, they use literature as an alternative ideological source to create this sense of Iranianness, to create a sense of this Iranian identity. And all those tombs and monuments were in fact meant to do this. As Tallenberger puts it very aptly, of course in another context, these civil sites came to replace the Shia pilgrimage destination. And in order to substantiate her argument, I can refer to statistical reports published by the Society for National Monuments, in which precise numbers were given for each of those monuments dedicated to Persian poets. And the third function of this literary canon, I believe, was cultural and linguistic assimilation. Since, as I said, in the Persian literary canon, there was no trace of Azerbaijani, Kurdish, Arabic literary works. It was, in fact, reinforcing the pillars of Iranian nationalism. It was an attempt to erase the traces of any other language and any other literature from Iran's official literary history. And consequently, teaching those literary textbooks in the peripheries of the country was at the same time, I mean, teaching Persian literature at the peripheries of the country was at the same time contributing to the hegemony of the Persian language. In the second part, drawn on some archival documents, I want to illustrate the scope of this language policy, this Persianization policy, and how it affected almost every aspect of life in the peripheries of the country. And here I'm focused on Iranian Azerbaijan. This is from a postcard that related to Congress for the Persian Language, which was held in 1926 in Tabriz. And I believe if we were to pinpoint an official date for the emergence of this Persianization policy, that would be this Congress, the day this Congress was held in Tabriz, because basically the purpose was to discourage the people of Tabriz and Azerbaijan from speaking their own mother tongue, and instead encourage them to start using Persian language in their daily exchanges. I've obtained a confidential report that was sent to Tehran after this Congress was finished, and here I'm quoting that confidential report, in which the writer makes some suggestions as to what should they do in the future to eradicate Turkish language. The writer writes that in the city and the neighboring areas, various associations with the purpose of promoting the Persian language must be formed, and schools must be built to encourage the inhabitants to speak Persian. It is of utmost importance to use teachers whose native language is Persian. Also, Azerbaijani teachers should be sent to the Persian areas. In this way, both the teachers and the students will quickly learn Persian, and consequently, in the celebrated age, the Azerbaijani people who are not familiar with the national language will speak Persian, and hence the possible obstacles will be surmounted and the foundations for prosperity and progress will be laid. So as you can see, the problem for the state was twofold. Neither the teachers, Azerbaijani teachers, nor the Azerbaijani students were familiar with the Persian language. And because of that, he is highlighting the fact that teachers should be sent to Azerbaijan from Tehran, because we have no access to people who know Persian here. The second, again, confidential letter is a letter written by the Armenian Archbishopric of Azerbaijan, 1927, and again sent to Tehran. And in it, the head of the Armenians laments the fact that recently they've been threatened by the Ministry of the Education that in case they do not adopt Persian language in all their classrooms, their schools will be closed, will be shut down. And then goes on to write that for the past 100 years, they've been using Armenian in their own languages in their schools. And the interesting part is that he writes that Tabriz is totally different from Tehran, and it's not easy to find people who know Persian, and we cannot find any teachers in Tabriz who can teach in Persian. So, and then appeals to the authorities to let them use their own mother tongue. This is another document written by the minister of the country to the prime minister. As you can see, there was this organization, Sazman Parverish Afkar, Organization for Public Enlightenment, which used to hold lecture sessions all over the country and kind of inject the ideology to the minds of the people. And I'm quoting again this document, and it says, lecture sessions are held once a week and music pieces and shows are included in the program to encourage people to attend these sessions. Since except for few people, the people of the third and fourth provinces do not know Persian at all, these speeches, whose main purpose is the intellectual cultivation of the masses, have not achieved their goals, and the policy of the promotion and development of the Persian language in these areas has not progressed as it should. So as you can see that almost all the archival documents, there is discussion that people in Azerbaijan are not familiar with Persian at all. And also notice the use of the third and fourth provinces, because after the Pahlavi state, following the establishment of the Pahlavi state, even the name Azerbaijan was removed from the official documents. And instead they started using this third province, fourth province in an attempt to get rid of this name of the Azerbaijan. This is again in another letter by the Ministry of Culture, and in it says that according to the rules, performing plays in languages other than Persian is completely prohibited. This is in reply to a letter that had asked for whether they are allowed to perform a play in Azerbaijani Turkish or not. And then it very clearly says that it is forbidden and prohibited. And this is a letter, confidential letter by the Ministry of Culture and Art, which says that publishing books or any other periodical in the Turkish language is forbidden very clearly. So as you can see, this Persianization language policy impacted almost every aspect of life in the Iranian Azerbaijan. According to the first document, they wanted to encourage people to stop speaking in Turkish. Like you can see, the publishing in Turkish was forbidden. In the school context, in official contexts, speaking in Turkish was forbidden. Performing plays in Turkish was forbidden. Teaching in classrooms in Turkish was forbidden. In all areas, you were forced to adopt Persian as the sole language. In the past 2 decades, various books, various studies have been published on the history of Iranian nationalism, and all of them in their own way have helped us to understand various stages of the development of the Iranian nationalism, various figures and masterminds behind it. I believe for the future, we need studies with a focus on language and literature, especially from the perspective of the minorities, Azerbaijanis, Kurds. Like, in order to find out how the development of this Persianization policy affected and impacted the development of the Azerbaijani literatures or Kurdish literatures in the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation. I myself find it very interesting because follow the situation of Azerbaijani people in Iran from time to time. Thank you. And now I invite Dr. Mateusz Kłagieś from Jagiellonian University, our Iranian Studies Department, to offer the presentation entitled History, Memory, Myth, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan and its mytho-historical origins. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Carolina, for your very kind invitation to actively participate also in this three-part project. And it's true honor and privilege for me to be with you today. And it's a very marvelous meeting because I was able to listen to very interesting and inspiring, truly inspiring papers. And before I start this last paper today, which I suppose is a little bit more postmodern in its structure than most of today's papers. I want to say that the topic was inspired by a single publication. I hope you can see it. It's called Afghan Box Camera. And this is project carried out, let's say about 10 years ago by the tandem of two non-professional researchers on photography industry in the 20th century Afghanistan. And among various pictures I was able to find in that publication, very inspiring, I was able to find this one picture, where it is. Yes, sorry, not this one. Yeah, this one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Let me start with a photograph taken in Herat. Well, I imagine that the sun's rays must have nicely brushed across the faces of those who were captured in it, and looking at the heavy coat that policeman walking unhurriedly at the side, keeping his hands in his pockets, it could have been autumn, and probably autumn 1978. And looking at the way he's bowing his head, it is impossible to get rid of the impression that he is here out of the duty rather than pleasure. And the gathering it captures is one of many that were held at that time, and being obligatory for all the state employees, they were meant to illustrate the support for the government of Nur Muhammad Taraki, who took the reins of power at the end of April 1978 due to the Saur Revolution. And it is here portraits that the participants in the march are carrying along with the red banners. The present of his portraits is not coincidental. In the early days of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, he was portrayed. Nur Muhammad Taraki was portrayed as the father of the revolution, and the intensity of the personality cult, in his case, transcendence all previous patterns familiar to Afghans. In this case, however, the intensification is far greater, although surprisingly, Nur Muhammad Taraki never found his way onto banknotes. The weak Afghan left, which lacks deeper ideological ties to society, makes up for its differences by constructing a completely new narrative about itself. And the construction of this new narrative, however, serves not only to strengthen its own position in society, but also to consolidate internally an environment that does not constitute a coherent political organization. At least this is how a number of moves to create this new history, which for my own purpose I call mytho-history, should be read. And what is the mytho-history? Well, I borrowed this term from Thorkild Jacobsen. He was a Danish-American specialist on ancient Assyria and Sumer, but I define it in a different way, as I'm interested in the space that is created at the meeting point of two disconnected, as they are often perceived, planes of memory, history and myth. And mytho-history is a space in which various operations performed on memory and in memory and on memory, including simplifications, smoothing, sharpening, distortion, omission, elaboration, or deception, claim to represent objective historical truth characterized by a new quality. And in the case of the Afghan variety of socialism, it is a space identical to the simulacrum. This means that it describes something that can never be fully realized and have never been fully realized. The mechanism for the creation of such a space are various, just as are the tools for projecting it into cultural, political, and social space. It can be a speech, it can be a radio or television program, it can be a poster, slogan, or postage stamp, it can be a film, novel, or a newspaper article, it can be a May Day march, etc. And mytho-history reflects the dynamics governing the system that produces it. The dynamics, this dynamic is aptly portrayed also in this photograph, which is intended to construct, establish, produce, or institutionalize a new reality. It is hard to tell if this is a conscious act by the photographer, but this small masterpiece perfectly captures the simulacral spirit of that time. As Jean Baudrillard explains, a simulacrum is a sign which, by referring to itself, makes the absence of reality. And why do I interpret this photograph as a simulacrum? Well, because it perpetuates an unreality. It constructs a mytho-historical narrative about the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan as an avant-garde, egalitarian, universal, progressive, proletarian, and revolutionary party that gives voice to every subaltern group, women also. While at the same time, consciously or not, this photograph exposes the gap between the PDPA itself and the Khalq, broad masses, represented by men dressed in traditional peasant clothes. The behavior of most of them clearly differs from the enthusiasm with which the leaders of the march, wearing jackets but not headgears, and making their presence with somatic gestures of raised hands or bold steps, are trying to infect them. The mass support embodied by public gatherings is in fact a delusion, a design of the party leaders that has never managed to be given a permanent quality. Indeed, this desire was embodied ad hoc time after time in the 1970s through the actions and encouragements of Babrak Karmal. Nur Muhammad Taraki is mytho-historical himself, as his biography, insofar as we can reconstruct it today, breaks down into two parallel interpreting versions: the wanted, say official, and the unwanted, say unofficial. The former one, wanted official, depicts Nur Muhammad Taraki as an activist who gained his first ideological training by putting up posters of the Communist Party of India in Mumbai in the 1930s. And as a poor village boy who was the first in his family to receive an education, a proper education, the unwanted, unofficial one, biography, connected to the ideological marking of his the unwanted unofficial biography tries to establish whether Nur Muhammad Taraki's stay of several years in India was really connected to the ideological marking of his future fate, and it proves that the view repeated after April 1978 that his dismissal from one of the ministries in the 1940s was caused by his opposition to the omnipresent corruption consuming the administrative apparatus. So this official vision is an evil dream and not a fact. Although readers of the Kabul Times may have read in October 1978 that quotation, Nur Muhammad Taraki was haunted by corrupt and reactionary bureaucrats who exerted pressure on him here and there, end of quotation. Anthony Arnold's conversations with Afghan dissidents during the first half of the 1980s proves otherwise. The reasons for Nur Muhammad Taraki's removal from the ministry are more prosaic. Moreover, they put his crystal figure painted by the wanted biography in a rather dark light, as he appropriated the building materials purchased by his superior for his own use and erected a house for them in one of Kabul's district. The house where the PDPA was established in winter of 1965, and which, by this very fact, changed its ontological status in the ideologized memory, acquiring the status of lieu de mémoire. It is not only a specific place on the map of the city, but also an artifact modeling the contemporary history memory of Afghanistan. And this new ontological status of the house is confirmed by two slogans on two postage stamps printed in 1979. The first one is, "From this place was issued the order for the Great Saur Revolution," and the second one is, "The first Congress of the PDPA took place in this house." And these two slogans open up entirely new space of mytho-history. It is a myth that the order came out of this house. Nur Muhammad Taraki had been in prison for several days at that time. The order probably came from another place, the house of Hafizullah Amin, who himself is subject of historical dispute and speculation, as he had not been taken for some strange reasons to prison, but was kept under house arrest. And one of the natural factors shaping the self-consciousness of political formation is also the founding myth, a modern political ideological travesty of the cosmogonic myth, allowing the authorities to consolidate members around a common goal, as well as allowing the members to define their political self-identification. Just as the founding myth of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is the dispute between Lenin and Martov, and the founding myth of the Polish United Workers' Party is the Reunion Congress in December of 1948, theoretically a pluralist, in practice preceded by purges. So the founding myth of the PDPA is the amicable meeting called later a founding Congress, held on the 1st of January 1965 in the house of Nur Muhammad Taraki. It should be noted here that the later meetings until 1978 were also held in the houses of other party members, yet only Nur Muhammad Taraki's one gained the status of the leader of memoir. Moreover, the founding Congress was not the first of the meetings that took place that time. The official state-sponsored historiography does not mention this, but bringing in mind the even distribution of party functions between two groups represented by Nur Muhammad Taraki and Babrak Karmal, it is impossible not to agree with the assessments of today's researchers that the January 1965 meeting served not only to consolidate political goals for this, as we can see today, were convergent for both grouping, but also to build a certain vision of a united, strong political formation, a vision useful to attract new members. And interestingly, in the memoirs of the participants of the founding Congress, the same event is recorded in two different versions. From the memoirs of Soleiman Layek emerges the full unity of the group, while according to Abdul Karim Misak, from the very beginning there were ideological and above all personal tensions between Nur Muhammad Taraki and Babrak Karmal, stemming from the personal aspirations of both politicians. Equally mytho-historical is one of Nur Muhammad Taraki's successors, Babrak Karmal, who has transformed his political identity into a surname Karmal, which means a friend of the working people. Although he does not come from a working class background, he is the son of a military officer, a state official, a person related to the old administrative apparatus, ancien regime, let's say. Moreover, he also changed his name. He was born as Sultan Hossein, and changing his name meant cutting himself off from his own bourgeois roots. But to return to this photograph, mytho-historical are also the agitators immortalized by the photographer. Conscious to the historical role they are to play, convinced that they have a monopoly on the true knowledge, although the reports of the Soviet embassy in Kabul in the 1960s and 1970s speak rather of a true, very pure knowledge of ideological foundations of Marxism-Leninism. And yet it was a part of, we have to remember it was a part of intellectuals, revolutionary theorists. They were not practitioners. The PDPA's objectives, as formulated in the program of the first issue of the Halk Day newspaper, are mytho-historical as well. The 1978 party constitution clearly demonstrates that the primary objective was to seizure the power, and the destruction of the democratic institutions would make this seizure possible. But because this democratic institution could threaten its loss in the future. The program was devoid of any references to Marxism, Leninism, to socialism, or to the leading role of the USSR, but full of camouflage phrases, along with the lines of like a new democratic front. This camouflage phrases also in the memoirs of the participants of the founding Congress, since Soleiman Layek, by the way, another intellectual who changed his skin by changing his name because he was born as Polam Mojaddad, talks about the national democratic sources of the ideology, explicitly rejecting the Marxist-Leninist character of the party. Meanwhile, the aforementioned Abdul Karim Misak stresses that from the very beginning the party referred to the Soviet ideological model. Finally, the Soviet Revolution of 1978 itself is mytho-historical. It did not take place within the framework of Karl Marx postulates. It did not play out in the fabric of workers' society, but in peasant society. Well, moreover, it wasn't a revolutionary par excellence, but it was a true military coup d'etat. And instead of some conclusions, let me just say that one can find and one can search for more examples of such mytho-historical origins of the PDPA, like the myth of revolutionary martyrs and the martyrs of the Third Arab of 1344, it is 1965, and it is also a part of an Afghan, so to say, heritage. We started with Kurdish heritage. We are finishing with Afghan heritage, because this photograph is also, as I truly believe, a part of a crucial element of Afghan cultural heritage, being so extensively and so horribly destroyed during the last 45 years, intentionally or unintentionally. And this photograph is also a comment to another works. I shall stop.
Mateusz, if you could conclude.
Yes. I'm finishing my speech. I only wanted to show you two more books, which I also trying to refer in my recent research. One was published in English. The second one is in Persian. Both were published in Afghanistan as a part of today's open, or let's say pre-Taliban, pre-2021 open discussion regarding Afghanistan past. And this photograph is also a part of discussion, as well as another example, which I am not able to show you today, but it is a calendar published approximately 15 years ago, as far as I can recall it now. The calendar presenting Afghan politicians from the Afghan history, and among kings, emirs, presidents, one can also find Nur Muhammad Taraki and Babrak Karmal. So they are truly recognized as true members of, so to say, modern Afghan history. And the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan is also recognized as a crucial element shaping the modern Afghan heritage, political, cultural, or social heritage. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation.